In the grand living room of her Millbrook estate, a 62-year-old widow was about to face the most calculated betrayal of her life. What started as a solemn funeral reception took a shocking turn when she came face to face with her daughter-in-law's ruthless ambition. Olivia Jackson wasn't your typical grieving widow. For 3 years, she had secretly built a financial empire, known for her strategic brilliance hidden beneath a traditional facade. When Victoria announced ownership of the family home, Olivia realized this was her moment to strike back. Her calm response would unleash a devastating family war. What began as a wake would become a battle for justice that would forever change Millbrook's most prominent family. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Olivia Jackson stood in the doorway of her own living room, watching the last of the mourners drift through her house like shadows. The scent of lilies hung heavy in the air, mixing with the subtle perfume of grief that seemed to cling to everything these days. She smoothed her black dress, the same one she'd worn to her mother's funeral 15 years ago, and forced her lips into the practiced smile of a grieving widow accepting condolences. 40 years, she thought, watching Pastor Williams shake hands with Thomas's business associates. 40 years of playing the perfect wife. The irony wasn't lost on her. Even in death, Thomas was still commanding a performance. She moved through the crowd with the grace of long practice, accepting embraces from neighbors who whispered about what a devoted couple they'd been, how Thomas had been taken too soon, how fortunate she was to have such a loving family to support her. Each word felt like a small knife, precisely placed and expertly twisted. "He was such a good man," Mrs. Patterson from next door murmured, pressing Olivia's hands between her own. "Always working so hard to provide for his family." "Yes," Olivia replied, her voice carrying just the right tremor of emotion. "He was very dedicated to his work." The truth sat bitter on her tongue. Thomas had been dedicated, all right. Dedicated to his secretary, to his schemes, to ensuring that his ungrateful wife would learn her place even after he was gone. But Mrs. Patterson didn't need to know that. Nobody did. Not yet. Across the room, she caught sight of Victoria, resplendent in a black designer dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her daughter-in-law moved through the mourners like a queen holding court, her platinum hair styled to perfection, her makeup flawless despite the supposed tragedy of losing her father-in-law. Victoria had always possessed an uncanny ability to make everything about herself, and today was no exception. Michael stood beside his wife, looking lost and uncomfortable in his ill-fitting black suit. At 38, her son still carried himself like a boy seeking approval, his shoulders hunched slightly as if expecting criticism. He'd grown up in Thomas's shadow, never quite measuring up to his father's exacting standards, and it showed in every uncertain gesture. "My poor boy," Olivia thought with a pang of maternal protectiveness. "If only you knew what your father really thought of you." "Grandma Olivia?" She turned to find Emma at her elbow, the 16-year-old's dark eyes filled with genuine concern. Unlike the adults around them, Emma's grief seemed authentic, raw, and unpolished. The girl had always been wise beyond her years, perhaps a necessary survival skill when your mother was Victoria. "Are you okay?" Emma asked quietly. "You look tired." Olivia's smile softened into something real. "I'm holding up, sweetheart. Thank you for asking." Emma glanced around the room, then leaned closer. "This feels weird, doesn't it? All these people talking about Grandpa Thomas like they really knew him. Perceptive child." "Funerals often bring out people's best memories," Olivia said carefully. "It's natural." "Yeah, but—" Emma's voice dropped to a whisper. "Mom's been planning this, like it's some kind of social event. She spent an hour this morning deciding which earrings would photograph best for her Instagram post about grief." Olivia felt a chill run down her spine, but she kept her expression neutral. People process loss differently. Emma's look suggested she wasn't buying it, but before she could respond, Margaret appeared at Olivia's other side. "How are you holding up, honey?" Thomas's sister asked, her nurse's training evident in the way she assessed Olivia's color and posture with a quick glance. One step at a time, Olivia replied. Margaret was one of the few people in the room she could trust, the only member of Thomas's family who had ever seen through his carefully constructed facade. Good turnout, Margaret observed, though her tone suggested she wasn't entirely pleased about it. Amazing how many friends Thomas had. Olivia followed her gaze to a group of his business associates, men who looked more interested in networking than mourning. He was always good at making connections. That's one way to put it. Margaret's voice carried an edge that only Olivia would catch. As a nurse, Margaret had developed a keen eye for identifying people who weren't quite what they seemed. She'd never liked Thomas's business practices, though she'd kept her opinions to herself for family harmony. The crowd was thinning now, the casual acquaintances and distant relatives making their excuses and heading home to their own lives. Soon, only the immediate family remained, along with a few close friends who lingered in the kitchen, cleaning up the remnants of the reception. Victoria chose that moment to strike. Well, she announced, her voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet living room. I suppose now is as good a time as any to discuss the arrangements. Olivia felt something cold settle in her stomach. Victoria stood in the center of the room like an actress commanding the stage, her posture radiating confidence and authority. Michael looked confused, while Emma shifted uncomfortably. What arrangements? Margaret asked, though her tone suggested she already suspected trouble. Victoria smiled, the expression as sharp as broken glass. The living arrangements. For the house. She gestured gracefully around the room, encompassing the space where they stood. Michael and I will be moving in, of course. This house belongs to us now. The silence that followed was deafening. Olivia felt the blood drain from her face, though not for the reasons Victoria probably expected. The audacity of it, announcing this here, now, in front of Thomas's body barely cold in the ground, was breathtaking even for Victoria. Excuse me? Margaret's voice could have cut steel. The will, Victoria continued smoothly, though Olivia noticed the slight flush of excitement in her cheeks. Thomas left everything to Michael. We've decided this house is perfect for our growing family. She placed a possessive hand on her still flat stomach. It'll be wonderful for the baby. Baby? Olivia's mind reeled. This was the first she'd heard of any pregnancy, though given Victoria's talent for manipulation, she wouldn't put it past her daughter-in-law to lie about something so fundamental. Michael's face had gone pale. Victoria, we never talked about. Of course we did, darling. Victoria's interruption was swift and decisive. Remember? Last week? We discussed how perfect this place would be for starting fresh. The lie came so easily, so smoothly, that Olivia almost admired the craftsmanship. Victoria had clearly planned this moment, chosen her timing for maximum impact. She expected shock, tears, desperate pleas. She expected to find Olivia broken and helpless. You can't be serious, Margaret said, her voice rising. Today? You're doing this today? Death is never convenient, Maggie, Victoria replied with false sympathy. But life goes on. We have to be practical about these things. Emma had gone very still, her teenage face a mask of horror. Mom, she whispered. Please don't. But Victoria was in full flow now, feeding off the drama she'd created. Olivia, I know this is difficult, but you have to understand. A house this size is really too much for one person. You'll be much happier in something smaller, more manageable. There are some lovely senior communities nearby. Senior communities? Olivia felt a laugh building in her chest, though it had nothing to do with humor. Victoria had no idea what she'd just walked into. I see, Olivia said quietly, her voice carrying none of the devastation Victoria clearly expected. And you've already made these plans? Well, naturally we'll need time to transition, Victoria continued, apparently taking Olivia's calm response as acceptance. But I was thinking we could start looking at options for you next week. There's no need to drag this out. Margaret looked ready to explode. Of all the heartless, manipulative... It's all right, Maggie. Olivia's voice carried a new quality, something that made everyone in the room go very still. She straightened her shoulders, and for a moment, the grieving widow facade slipped entirely. Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly, as if she'd caught a glimpse of something unexpected. You know, Olivia continued, her tone conversational. It's interesting that you should bring this up now, Victoria, because as it happens, I have some news for you too. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Michael shifted nervously, while Emma watched with wide eyes. News? Victoria's voice had lost some of its confidence. Olivia smiled, not the practiced expression of a grieving widow, but something sharper, more dangerous. Oh yes. You see, I've been doing quite a bit of planning myself these past few years. And I think you're going to find that things aren't quite as straightforward as you imagine. Victoria's face went very pale. What are you talking about? Well, Olivia said, savoring the moment she'd been planning for 3 long years. That's a conversation for tomorrow, don't you think? After all, as you said, today isn't really the time for difficult discussions. The power dynamic in the room shifted like tectonic plates. Victoria stood frozen, her mouth slightly open, while Michael looked between his wife and mother with growing confusion. Margaret's lips curved into the first genuine smile anyone had seen all day. And Emma, wise, perceptive Emma, whispered under her breath, "Oh, this is going to be good." Olivia looked around the room one more time, at the flowers that would soon wilt, at the faces of people she'd spent 40 years pretending to trust, at the house that had been her prison and was about to become her fortress. Tomorrow, she would show them exactly what kind of woman they'd been dealing with all along. Tonight, let them wonder. The tension from Olivia's cryptic promise hung in the air like smoke from extinguished candles. Victoria stood frozen in the center of the living room, her confident mask beginning to crack around the edges. The silence stretched until Michael finally cleared his throat. Maybe we should sit down and discuss this properly," he said, his voice uncertain. He'd inherited his father's tendency to avoid conflict, but even he could sense the dangerous undercurrents swirling around them. "An excellent idea," came a crisp voice from the doorway. Everyone turned to see a woman in her mid-40s entering the room, carrying a leather briefcase and moving with the purposeful stride of someone accustomed to courtrooms. She was Asian American, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that somehow managed to be both professional and respectful of the funeral setting. "Who the hell are you?" Victoria snapped, her composure finally beginning to fray. "Sarah Chen," the woman replied coolly, extending a business card that Victoria ignored. "I'm Mrs. Jackson's attorney." The words hit the room like a physical blow. Michael's mouth fell open, while Margaret's eyebrows shot toward her hairline. Emma looked between the adults, her teenage mind clearly working to process this unexpected development. "Attorney?" Michael's voice cracked slightly. "Mom, why do you have an attorney?" Olivia's smile was serene, but there was steel beneath it now. "Shall we adjourn to your father's study? I think this conversation requires privacy." She didn't wait for an answer, simply turned and walked toward the mahogany-paneled room that had been Thomas's domain for decades. The others followed like iron filings drawn to a magnet, Victoria's heels clicking angrily against the hardwood floors. Thomas's study still smelled of his cologne and old leather. The massive desk dominated the room, its surface clear except for a single folder that Sarah Chen had apparently placed there earlier. Behind it, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves held volumes on construction, business law, and military history, the intellectual armor of a man who'd built his identity around control and traditional masculine authority. Victoria immediately claimed one of the wingback chairs facing the desk, arranging herself like a queen holding court. Michael took the chair beside her while Margaret positioned herself protectively near Olivia. Emma hovered uncertainly by the door as if ready to bolt. "Please, Emma, sit," Olivia said gently, gesturing to a smaller chair near the window. "This concerns your future too." Sarah Chen moved behind the desk, her hands resting lightly on the folder. "Before we begin, I need to establish some ground rules. This is a legal discussion about estate matters. Everything said in this room should be considered privileged communication. I don't need legal threats, Victoria said, though her voice had lost some of its earlier venom. We all know what Thomas's will says. He left everything to Michael. Actually, Sarah said, opening the folder with deliberate care, that's precisely what we need to discuss. She withdrew a thick document and placed it in front of her. This is indeed Thomas Hartwell's last will and testament, dated 3 months ago. And you're correct. It does leave the bulk of his estate to his son Michael. Victoria's smile returned, triumphant and sharp. There, you see? This house, the business assets, everything. However, Sarah continued smoothly, what Mr. Hartwell didn't realize when he drafted this will is that many of the assets he believed he owned to bequeath were no longer legally his to give. The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria's smile flickered like a candle in wind. What do you mean? Michael asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Olivia stood slowly, moving to stand beside her attorney. For the first time since Thomas's death, she looked every inch the woman she'd once been before 40 years of marriage had taught her to make herself smaller. I mean, son, that 3 years ago I discovered your father's affair with his secretary. More importantly, I discovered his plan to divorce me and leave me with nothing as punishment for not being the wife he felt he deserved. The words fell into the room like stones into still water, creating ripples that reached every corner. Michael's face went white, while Margaret muttered something under her breath that sounded distinctly uncomplimentary about her late brother. That's impossible, Victoria said, but uncertainty had crept into her voice. Thomas would never. Thomas was many things, Olivia interrupted, her voice carrying a new authority. Faithful wasn't one of them, nor was he as clever as he thought. Sarah withdrew another set of documents from the folder. Mrs. Jackson, would you like to explain, or shall I? I think I should, Olivia said. She looked around the room, her gaze lingering on each face. You see, when I discovered Thomas's plans, I realized I had 2 choices. I could play the victim and let him destroy me, or I could prepare. She moved to the window, looking out at the garden she'd tended for decades. I chose to prepare. 3 years ago, I quietly retained Mrs. Chen here. We began a very careful, very legal process of protecting assets that were rightfully mine. The vacation home in the Hamptons, for instance, that was purchased with money from my inheritance from my parents. Legally, it should never have been considered marital property. Victoria's face had gone from pale to flushed. You can't just... The 2 rental properties downtown, Olivia continued as if Victoria hadn't spoken, were purchased using profits from investments I made before our marriage. Again, legally mine. Sarah took over seamlessly. Mrs. Jackson also established several businesses in her own name during this period. Her online vintage jewelry company has been quite successful. Michael looked like he'd been struck. Mom, I don't understand. You never said anything about running a business. For the first time, Olivia's composure cracked slightly, revealing the hurt beneath. Your father made it very clear over the years that he considered my opinions about business matters worthless. I learned to keep my activities to myself. Margaret made a sound that might have been a growl. That bastard. I knew he was controlling, but this... The jewelry business started small, Olivia said, her voice growing stronger with each word. Selling pieces from my grandmother's collection. But I discovered I had quite an eye for vintage pieces, and more importantly, I understood their history and provenance. Within 2 years, I was turning a substantial profit. She returned to her position beside Sarah's desk. I also began making strategic investments. Nothing flashy, nothing that would attract Thomas's attention, but careful, conservative investments that have performed very well. Victoria's hands were clenched so tightly her knuckles were white. This is ridiculous. Even if you have some savings, some little hobby business, it doesn't change the fact that this house belongs to me. Olivia finished quietly. The room erupted. Victoria shot to her feet, her carefully maintained composure finally shattering completely. That's impossible. Thomas owned this house. He bought it before you were even married. Thomas took out a second mortgage on this house 2 years ago, Sarah said, consulting her notes with professional calm. He needed the money for his business expansion. What he didn't realize was that by doing so, he'd created a legal opening. Mrs. Jackson was able to purchase the mortgage from the bank, Sarah continued. Quietly through a shell company we established for her business interests. She now holds the deed to this property. Victoria's face cycled through several colors before settling on an alarming shade of purple. You can't do that. That's fraud. It's business, Olivia replied with devastating calm. All perfectly legal, all properly documented. Thomas always said women didn't understand finance. It turns out he was half right. I didn't understand how he conducted his business, but I'm a very quick learner. Michael had been silent throughout this exchange, but now he looked up at his mother with something approaching awe. You've been planning this for 3 years? I've been protecting myself for 3 years, Olivia corrected gently. I hoped I'd never need to use any of it. I kept thinking Thomas might change his mind, might remember the woman he'd once loved enough to marry. Her voice cut slightly. Even after I found the divorce papers in his desk drawer, I hoped. Right up until the day he died, I hoped he might come to his senses. Emma had been silent throughout the revelations, but now she spoke up, her young voice clear in the charged atmosphere. Grandpa Thomas was going to divorce Grandma Olivia? The naked pain in the teenager's voice seemed to cut through Victoria's rage. For a moment her face softened and she looked at her daughter with something approaching concern. Emma, sweetheart, these are complicated adult matters, she began. No, Emma said firmly, standing up with a dignity that belied her 16 years. Don't treat me like I'm stupid. I've watched what's been happening in this family. I've seen how Mom talks about Grandma Olivia when she thinks I'm not listening. Victoria's face flushed. Emma, that's enough. Is it? Emma turned to face her mother fully. Because it seems like Grandma Olivia was just protecting herself from exactly what you tried to do today. The accusation hung in the air like a sword. Victoria opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. This is insane, she finally managed. Michael, you can't let her get away with this. She's stolen your inheritance. Michael looked between his wife and his mother, his face a battlefield of conflicting loyalties. I need to think about this. Think about what? Victoria's voice rose dangerously. She's manipulated everything. She's destroyed our future. No, Olivia said, her voice cutting through Victoria's hysteria like a blade through silk. I've secured my own. She moved to stand in front of the desk that had once symbolized her husband's authority over their household. Now it seemed to serve her, as if the power dynamic had shifted with her revelation. But Victoria, she continued, her tone deceptively mild, we're not finished yet. You see, while I was busy protecting my assets, I couldn't help but notice some irregularities in yours. Victoria went very still. What do you mean? Olivia's smile was razor sharp. Well, that's a discussion for another time, don't you think? After all, today has been quite eventful enough. As if summoned by her words, Sarah Chen began gathering her papers, her movements efficient and final. I think that's sufficient for today. Mrs. Jackson, shall we schedule a follow-up meeting for next week? That sounds perfect, Olivia replied. She looked around the room one final time, taking in the shell-shocked faces of her family members. I trust everyone can see themselves out. Victoria stood frozen, her mouth working soundlessly. Michael looked like he'd been hit by a truck. Margaret appeared to be fighting back laughter, while Emma watched everything with the fascination of someone witnessing history in the making. As they filed out of the study, Olivia remained behind, standing in the space that had once been forbidden territory. Tomorrow she would tell them about the photographs, about the bank records, about all the other secrets she'd uncovered. Tonight, she would let them wonder what other surprises awaited them. The war was just beginning. 2 days after the funeral, Olivia stood in her living room, the same space where mourners had gathered, where Victoria had made her brazen announcement. The flowers were gone now, replaced by an atmosphere thick with unresolved tension. Through the window, she watched a black sedan pull into her driveway, followed immediately by Victoria's white BMW. They were back. And they'd brought reinforcements. The doorbell chimed with false pleasantry. Olivia took her time answering it, smoothing her navy blouse and checking her reflection in the hallway mirror. Gone was the grieving widow in funeral black. Today, she looked like what she'd secretly become, a woman who meant business. Victoria stood on the doorstep, flanked by a man in an expensive suit who clutched a briefcase like a shield. Behind them, Michael shifted nervously, his face bearing the telltale signs of 2 sleepless nights. "Olivia," Victoria said, her voice brittle with forced civility. "We need to talk." "Of course," Olivia replied, stepping aside to let them enter. "Please, come in." The lawyer, a thin man with sharp features and calculating eyes, immediately began surveying the room as if appraising its contents. His gaze lingered on the antique pieces, the original artwork, the obvious markers of wealth. "This is Richard Blackstone," Victoria announced, her chin lifted in defiance. "He specializes in estate law and irregularities." "How fascinating," Olivia said mildly. "Would anyone like coffee?" "We're not here for social pleasantries," Blackstone interjected, his voice carrying the practiced authority of someone accustomed to intimidating opponents. "Mrs. Hartwell has informed me of certain questionable activities regarding the estate of her late father-in-law." Olivia settled into her favorite armchair, the one that gave her the best view of the room and positioned her back to the wall. "Questionable activities? How intriguing. Please, elaborate." Victoria's eyes glittered with malicious satisfaction. "The property transfers, the mysterious business ventures, the convenient timing of your acquisitions. Richard thinks there's a strong case for proving undue influence and financial manipulation." "I see." Olivia's voice remained perfectly calm, though inwardly she felt a familiar thrill. This was the moment she'd been preparing for. "And what evidence do you have to support these theories?" Blackstone opened his briefcase with theatrical flourish. "We've already begun investigating your financial activities, Mrs. Jackson. Bank records, property transfers, business registrations. It's quite a paper trail for someone who claimed to know nothing about business matters." Michael spoke up for the first time, his voice strained. "Mom, if you did something illegal—" "I didn't," Olivia said simply. She reached for her phone, scrolling through it with deliberate calm. "In fact, I'm quite proud of my business acumen. Sarah assured me that everything was not only legal, but rather cleverly executed." "We'll see about that," Victoria snapped. "Richard has connections at the state attorney's office. They take financial elder abuse very seriously." "Elder abuse." Olivia savored the words like fine wine. "What do you mean?" Olivia's smile was razor-sharp. "Well, that's a discussion for another time, don't you think? After all, today has been quite eventful enough." As if summoned by her words, Sarah Chen began gathering her papers, her movements efficient and final. "I think that's sufficient for today. Mrs. Jackson, shall we schedule a follow-up meeting for next week?" "That sounds perfect," Olivia replied. She looked around the room one final time, taking in the shell-shocked faces of her family members. "I trust everyone can see themselves out." Victoria stood frozen, her mouth working soundlessly. Michael looked like he'd been hit by a truck. Margaret appeared to be fighting back laughter, while Emma watched everything with the fascination of someone witnessing history in the making. As they filed out of the study, Olivia remained behind, standing in the space that had once been forbidden territory. Tomorrow she would tell them about the photographs, about the bank records, about all the other secrets she'd uncovered. Tonight, she would let them wonder what other surprises awaited them. The war was just beginning. 2 days after the funeral, Olivia stood in her living room, the same space where mourners had gathered, where Victoria had made her brazen announcement. The flowers were gone now, replaced by an atmosphere thick with unresolved tension. Through the window, she watched a black sedan pull into her driveway, followed immediately by Victoria's white BMW. They were back. And they'd brought reinforcements. The doorbell chimed with false pleasantry. Olivia took her time answering it, smoothing her navy blouse and checking her reflection in the hallway mirror. Gone was the grieving widow in funeral black. Today, she looked like what she'd secretly become, a woman who meant business. Victoria stood on the doorstep, flanked by a man in an expensive suit who clutched a briefcase like a shield. Behind them, Michael shifted nervously, his face bearing the telltale signs of 2 sleepless nights. "Olivia," Victoria said, her voice brittle with forced civility. "We need to talk." "Of course," Olivia replied, stepping aside to let them enter. "Please, come in." The lawyer, a thin man with sharp features and calculating eyes, immediately began surveying the room as if appraising its contents. His gaze lingered on the antique pieces, the original artwork, the obvious markers of wealth. "This is Richard Blackstone," Victoria announced, her chin lifted in defiance. "He specializes in estate law and irregularities." "How fascinating," Olivia said mildly. "Would anyone like coffee?" "We're not here for social pleasantries," Blackstone interjected, his voice carrying the practiced authority of someone accustomed to intimidating opponents. "Mrs. Hartwell has informed me of certain questionable activities regarding the estate of her late father-in-law." Olivia settled into her favorite armchair, the one that gave her the best view of the room and positioned her back to the wall. "Questionable activities? How intriguing. Please, elaborate." Victoria's eyes glittered with malicious satisfaction. "The property transfers, the mysterious business ventures, the convenient timing of your acquisitions. Richard thinks there's a strong case for proving undue influence and financial manipulation." "I see." Olivia's voice remained perfectly calm, though inwardly she felt a familiar thrill. This was the moment she'd been preparing for. "And what evidence do you have to support these theories?" Blackstone opened his briefcase with theatrical flourish. "We've already begun investigating your financial activities, Mrs. Jackson. Bank records, property transfers, business registrations. It's quite a paper trail for someone who claimed to know nothing about business matters." Michael spoke up for the first time, his voice strained. "Mom, if you did something illegal—" "I didn't," Olivia said simply. She reached for her phone, scrolling through it with deliberate calm. "In fact, I'm quite proud of my business acumen. Sarah assured me that everything was not only legal, but rather cleverly executed." "We'll see about that," Victoria snapped. "Richard has connections at the state attorney's office. They take financial elder abuse very seriously." Elder abuse. Olivia savored the words like fine wine. "What an interesting choice of phrase, Victoria." Something in her tone made the room go very quiet. Even Blackstone looked up from his papers, sensing a shift in the atmosphere. "You know," Olivia continued conversationally, "since we're discussing questionable financial activities, I thought you might be interested in seeing some documents I've gathered." She reached into the side table drawer and withdrew a manila envelope, thick with contents. "I've always been something of a pack rat. Thomas used to tease me about keeping every receipt, every bank statement. He said it was obsessive." Victoria's face had gone pale. "What are you talking about?" "Well, for instance," Olivia said, sliding a photograph across the coffee table. "This was taken 6 months ago at the Meridian Hotel. Interesting choice for a lunch meeting, don't you think?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The photograph showed Victoria locked in an intimate embrace with a younger man, not Michael. They were partially obscured by shadows, but there was no mistaking the body language or the passion of the moment. Michael made a sound like he'd been punched. "Victoria? That's not what it looks like," Victoria stammered, but her voice lacked conviction. "Oh, but there's more," Olivia said with deadly sweetness. She produced another photograph, this one, showing Victoria and the same man entering an apartment building. "I hired a private investigator 18 months ago. Professional curiosity, you understand. I wanted to know what kept you so busy while Michael was at work." Blackstone had gone very still, recognizing that his client was no longer in control of this conversation. "The young man is James Morrison," Olivia continued matter-of-factly. 28 years old, personal trainer at Elite Fitness. Quite charming, I'm told. He has a particular talent for attracting the attention of wealthy, married women. "You can't prove anything with photographs," Victoria said desperately. "People meet for all sorts of reasons." You're absolutely right, Olivia agreed. Photographs can be misleading. Bank records, however, tend to be rather more definitive. She produced a thick stack of papers. These are copies of withdrawals from Michael's personal account over the past 18 months. Interesting pattern, don't you think? $500 here, $800 there, always in cash, always on days when you claim to be at the spa or shopping. Michael reached for the papers with trembling hands. His face went through several colors as he read, finally settling on a shade that reminded Olivia uncomfortably of old parchment. $15,000, he whispered. Victoria, what did you need $15,000 for? It's not what you think, Victoria said, but the fight was going out of her voice. I can explain. Can you? Olivia asked. Because I have receipts from a rather expensive jewelry store. Custom pieces, all paid for in cash. The descriptions match some lovely items I've seen you wearing lately. She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to just above a whisper. Gifts for a lover, perhaps? Victoria's composure finally shattered completely. You bitch, she snarled. You manipulative, vindictive bitch. You think you're so clever, but you're just a dried-up old woman who couldn't keep her husband happy. Victoria! Michael's voice cracked like a whip, but she was beyond hearing. At least I'm not a thief, Olivia replied with devastating calm. And speaking of theft, she produced one final document. This is a record of transfers from Michael's business account. Smaller amounts, but more frequent. Always to a shell company called VH Enterprises. I wonder who VH might be. The silence stretched until Blackstone cleared his throat. Mrs. Hartwell, I think we should discuss this privately. No, Michael said suddenly. His voice was quiet, but it carried an authority that surprised everyone in the room. I want to hear this. All of it. Olivia looked at her son, really looked at him, and saw something she hadn't seen in years: spine. The transfers total $23,000 over 2 years, she said gently. VH Enterprises is registered to Victoria Harrison, her maiden name. You stole from me, Michael said, the words falling into the room like stones. You stole from your own husband. It wasn't stealing, Victoria protested weakly. We're married. The money was in a business account that you had no legal access to. Blackstone interrupted sharply. If these records are accurate, you've committed fraud. The room fell silent, except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Victoria looked around desperately, seeking support that wasn't there. Even Blackstone had withdrawn slightly, distancing himself from a case that had just become a liability. This isn't over, Victoria said finally, her voice shaking with rage and desperation. I'll fight this. I'll fight all of it. You're welcome to try, Olivia replied serenely. Though I should mention that my private investigator has been quite thorough. Video evidence, financial records, witness statements. It's all quite comprehensive. As if summoned by her words, the front door opened and Emma walked in, returning from school. She took one look at the assembled adults and the scattered photographs on the coffee table, and her face went very still. What's happening? She asked quietly. Victoria jumped up, moving toward her daughter with desperate energy. Emma, sweetheart, we're leaving. Get your things. No, Emma said simply. I want to know what's happening. And in that moment, Olivia saw the future shift. Emma was no longer a child to be protected from adult truths. She was a young woman who deserved honesty, even when that honesty was ugly. Your mother has been having an affair, Olivia said gently, and stealing money to pay for it. Emma looked at Victoria for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I know, she said. I've known for months. Victoria's face crumpled. Emma, please. I've been waiting for someone to finally tell the truth, Emma continued, her voice steady despite the tears starting to form in her eyes. I'm tired of pretending everything is okay when it's not. The war had just claimed its first casualty, and Victoria was beginning to realize that she might have underestimated more than just Olivia's determination. She had underestimated the price of her own deceptions. The aftermath of Emma's revelation hung in the living room like smoke from a house fire. Victoria stood frozen, her face cycling through emotions too quickly to catalog, while Michael stared at his daughter with something approaching wonder. Even Blackstone seemed to recognize that his carefully planned legal strategy had just imploded. "Emma," Victoria whispered, reaching toward her daughter with desperate hands. "Sweetheart, you don't understand what you're saying." "I understand perfectly," Emma replied, stepping back from her mother's touch. Her 16-year-old voice carried a weight that spoke of sleepless nights and careful observation. "I've been watching this family fall apart for months, and nobody thought I was worth telling the truth to." Before Victoria could respond, the doorbell rang again. Olivia glanced toward the foyer, frowning. She wasn't expecting anyone else, and the timing felt ominous. "I'll get it," she said, moving toward the door with measured steps. Through the frosted glass, she could make out a tall, lean figure. When she opened the door, she found herself face to face with a young man who could have stepped off a magazine cover. Dark hair artfully tousled, strong jaw, gym-sculpted physique evident even beneath his casual button-down shirt. He had the kind of easy smile that probably opened a lot of doors, and a lot of wallets. "Mrs. Jackson?" His voice was smooth, confident. "I'm Jimmy Morrison. I think we need to talk." Behind her, Olivia heard Victoria make a sound like a wounded animal. "Mr. Morrison?" Olivia said calmly, though her mind was racing. "How timely. Please, come in." Jimmy entered with the casual confidence of someone who believed his charm could handle any situation. He nodded politely to Olivia, then his gaze swept the living room, taking in the assembled crowd with obvious interest. "Victoria," he said, his smile widening as he spotted her. "You didn't tell me this was a family meeting. What are you doing here?" Victoria's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried clearly in the silent room. "Well," Jimmy said, settling into an empty chair without invitation. "When you called me crying yesterday about some kind of family emergency, I figured I should check in. Make sure you were handling things okay." Michael had gone very still, his gaze fixed on the young man with laser intensity. "You're him," he said quietly. "You're the one in the photographs." Jimmy's smile faltered slightly, but he recovered quickly. "Photographs? That sounds dramatic." He looked around the room with mock concern. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "On the contrary," Olivia said, retaking her seat with perfect composure. "Your timing is impeccable. We were just discussing some rather interesting financial irregularities." Something shifted in Jimmy's expression, a flicker of calculation that suggested there was more going on behind the charming facade than most people saw. "Financial irregularities," he repeated slowly. "That does sound serious." Blackstone cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with this unexpected development. "Mrs. Hartwell, I really think we should schedule another meeting when there are fewer complications." "Oh, I wouldn't worry about complications," Jimmy said cheerfully. "I'm very good at keeping things simple." He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small digital recorder, placing it on the coffee table with theatrical flair. "In fact, I think I might be able to help clear up some of those irregularities you mentioned." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Victoria's face had gone chalk white, while Michael leaned forward with predatory focus. "You see," Jimmy continued conversationally, "Victoria and I have had some very interesting conversations over the past few months. Especially recently when she started getting worried about her financial situation." He pressed play on the recorder. Victoria's voice filled the room, tinny but unmistakable. "Told you, the old bitch doesn't know anything about business. She's going to be so lost without Thomas that she'll sign whatever Michael puts in front of her. We just need to make sure she understands that fighting us would be pointless." Jimmy paused the recording, his smile now razor sharp. "Should I continue? There's quite a bit more." "Turn it off?" Victoria whispered. Now, Jimmy said, wagging a finger playfully. "We're just getting to the good parts." Like when you talked about how easy it would be to contest any claims she might make. Or when you explained your plan to have her declared mentally incompetent if she didn't cooperate. Emma made a small sound of distress. Michael's hands were clenched into fists, his knuckles white against his dark pants. Or, Jimmy continued, clearly enjoying himself now, my personal favorite, when you talked about how you could always blame any missing money on the old woman's confusion about finances. He looked around the room with bright interest. That was particularly creative, I thought, making the victim look like the perpetrator. What do you want? Olivia asked quietly. She'd been watching Jimmy carefully, and she recognized the type. Charming predator, skilled at reading people's weaknesses and exploiting them. What do I want? Jimmy's laugh was genuinely delighted. Mrs. Jackson, you cut right to the heart of things, don't you? I like that. He leaned back in his chair, completely at ease despite the tension radiating from everyone else in the room. Well, since you asked, I want to be compensated for my time and discretion. You're blackmailing us, Michael said flatly. Blackmail is such an ugly word, Jimmy replied with mock hurt. I prefer to think of it as consulting fees for services rendered. He gestured toward Victoria with casual cruelty. Your wife hired me to help her stay in shape, but she also paid me to listen to her problems. And boy did she have problems. Money problems, family problems, marriage problems. How much? Blackstone asked tersely, recognizing a negotiation when he saw one. Jimmy's smile widened. $50,000 from each party. Each party? Olivia raised an eyebrow. Well, Victoria needs my silence about our relationship and her little embezzlement scheme. But you, Mrs. Jackson, you need my testimony about her plans for you. I think that's worth something, don't you? The audacity of it was breathtaking. Jimmy Morrison wasn't just blackmailing Victoria, he was trying to shake down the entire family. And if we refuse? Olivia asked with genuine curiosity. Jimmy shrugged eloquently. Then I take these recordings to the police. Victoria goes down for fraud and theft. Michael loses his business reputation when it comes out that he couldn't control his own wife's criminal activities. And you? He pointed at Olivia with mock sympathy. You get to explain to investigators why you didn't report the theft when you first discovered it. Failure to report a crime. Obstruction of justice. It gets complicated quickly. The silence that followed was pregnant with possibility. Victoria looked like she might vomit, while Michael appeared to be calculating whether he could reach Jimmy before the younger man could react. It was Emma who broke the silence. You're disgusting, she said quietly, her young voice cutting through the adult tension like a blade. All of you. You're fighting over money while my family falls apart. She looked at Jimmy with pure contempt. And you're the worst of all. At least they're family. You're just a parasite. Jimmy's charming mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. Kid, this is adult business. No, Emma said firmly. This is my business too. This is my family, my home, my future you're all fighting over. She turned to Olivia, her eyes bright with unshed tears but her voice steady. Grandma Olivia, what are you going to do? Olivia looked at her granddaughter, not by blood, but by choice and love, and felt something settle into place. This wasn't just about protecting herself anymore. It was about protecting Emma, about showing her that some lines couldn't be crossed without consequences. I'm going to call the police, Olivia said calmly. Jimmy's confidence flickered. I wouldn't do that if I were you. These recordings implicate all of you. No, Olivia interrupted, reaching for her phone. They implicate Victoria in planning fraud and theft. They implicate you in conspiracy, and now blackmail. But they don't implicate me in anything, except being the intended victim. She began dialing, her fingers steady on the keys. You see, Mr. Morrison, you made the same mistake Victoria did. You assumed I was a helpless old woman who could be intimidated. Jimmy lunged for the recorder, but Michael was faster. For the first time in years, Thomas's son showed the backbone his father had always claimed he lacked. He grabbed Jimmy's wrist in a grip that made the younger man yelp. I don't think so, Michael said quietly. Detective Martinez? Olivia spoke into her phone, her voice perfectly composed. "This is Olivia Jackson. I need to report an attempted blackmail." "Yes, I'll hold." Victoria finally found her voice. "Olivia, please. Think about Emma. Think about what this will do to her." Olivia covered the phone with her hand, looking at Victoria with something approaching pity. "I am thinking about Emma. I'm thinking about what kind of world I want to leave her. One where criminals face consequences, or one where they're rewarded for their cruelty." She returned to her call. "Yes, detective. I have several individuals here who I believe you'll want to speak with." As Olivia provided the address and details, Jimmy Morrison's charming facade finally crumbled completely. He looked around the room desperately, perhaps finally realizing that his usual methods weren't going to work here. Margaret chose that moment to arrive, letting herself in through the back door as she'd done for years. She took one look at the tableau. Michael restraining a struggling Jimmy, Victoria in tears, Blackstone frantically packing his briefcase, and Olivia calmly speaking to the police, and shook her head. "Well," she said dryly, "I can see the family meeting is going well." Emma looked at her great-aunt with something approaching relief. "Aunt Maggie, can you take me somewhere else? I don't want to be here when the police come." "Of course, sweetheart," Margaret said immediately, moving to put a protective arm around the girl. "We'll go get some ice cream and let the adults sort out their mess." As they prepared to leave, Emma turned back to Olivia. "Grandma, will you be okay?" Olivia's smile was gentle but fierce. "I'll be fine, darling. Better than fine." Emma nodded, then looked at her mother with eyes that seemed far too old for her 16 years. "Mom, I love you, but I can't live with who you've become." With that devastating pronouncement, she walked out with Margaret, leaving the adults to face the consequences of their choices. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. The war had escalated beyond family conflict now. The law was coming, and with it, a reckoning that would reshape all their lives. Jimmy Morrison had thought he was the smartest person in the room. He was about to learn just how wrong he could be. Detective Rosa Martinez had seen enough family dysfunction in her 15 years on the force to recognize the signs before she even stepped out of her patrol car. The expensive house in Millbrook's most exclusive neighborhood, the luxury vehicles in the driveway, and the careful positioning of the people visible through the front windows all told a story of wealth masking deeper problems. She knocked on the door with the measured authority of someone who'd learned that the first few minutes of any domestic call could determine whether the situation escalated or de-escalated. Olivia Jackson answered the door herself, and Martinez immediately noted several things. The woman was composed but alert. Her posture suggested someone prepared for confrontation, and there was steel in her eyes that spoke of recent decisions made and lines crossed. "Mrs. Jackson, I'm Detective Martinez. You called about a blackmail attempt?" "Yes, detective. Thank you for coming so quickly." Olivia stepped aside, gesturing for Martinez to enter. "The situation is complex." As Martinez entered the living room, she automatically cataloged the scene. A young man sat in a chair, his wrists zip-tied with what looked like electrical ties, improvised but effective restraint. An older man in an expensive suit was hurriedly packing papers into a briefcase, clearly eager to leave. A woman in her 30s sat on the couch, mascara streaked down her cheeks, while a man who shared Olivia's facial features stood nearby, looking shell-shocked. "I see you've been busy," Martinez observed dryly. "Who wants to start?" "I restrained him," Michael said immediately, nodding toward Jimmy. "He was trying to destroy evidence." Martinez approached Jimmy Morrison, noting his expensive, casual clothing and the way he carried himself despite being restrained. "And you are?" "James Morrison," Jimmy replied, attempting to summon his usual charm despite the circumstances. "Detective, there's been a misunderstanding. I'm actually trying to help these people." "By blackmailing them?" Martinez interrupted, pulling out her notebook. "Mrs. Jackson, why don't you walk me through what happened?" Olivia settled into her chair with the composure of someone who'd prepared for this moment. "Mr. Morrison arrived uninvited today and attempted to extort $50,000 from me and a similar amount from my daughter-in-law, in exchange for his silence about her criminal activities. Criminal activities? Martinez looked at Victoria, who seemed to shrink into the couch cushions. Theft from her husband's accounts, fraud, and conspiracy to commit elder abuse. Olivia replied matter-of-factly, "I have extensive documentation." Martinez had been expecting a typical domestic dispute, maybe some family argument over inheritance. This was something else entirely. "Mr. Blackstone, I assume?" she said, addressing the lawyer. "Richard Blackstone, attorney for Mrs. Hartwell," he replied stiffly. "Detective, I should inform you that my client was under considerable emotional duress. Your client was planning to steal from an elderly woman." Jimmy interrupted with a bitter laugh. "I've got it all on tape." "Mr. Morrison," Martinez said sharply, "I'd advise you to remain silent until you can speak with an attorney." She turned back to Olivia. "Mrs. Jackson, I'm going to need to see this documentation you mentioned." "Of course." Olivia retrieved the manila envelope from the side table. "I've been gathering evidence for some time. Bank records, photographs, financial statements." Martinez accepted the envelope, already sensing that this case was going to be more complicated than a simple blackmail complaint. "I'll need to interview everyone separately. Is there somewhere private we can speak?" "My late husband's study," Olivia suggested. As they moved toward the study, Martinez heard Blackstone speaking quietly to Victoria. "Don't say anything else, not one word until I can arrange proper representation." In the privacy of the study, Martinez spread the contents of Olivia's envelope across the desk. The documentation was comprehensive and meticulously organized. Bank statements highlighted in yellow, photographs arranged chronologically, financial records cross-referenced with dates and amounts. "Mrs. Jackson, this is very thorough work. How long have you been collecting this evidence?" 18 months for the affair, 3 years for the financial planning." Olivia's voice was steady, but Martinez caught an undercurrent of pain. "When I discovered my husband's infidelity and his plans to divorce me penniless, I realized I needed to protect myself." Martinez studied the bank statements showing the systematic withdrawals from Michael's accounts. "These transfers to VH Enterprises. You're certain Mrs. Hartwell was behind them?" "VH are her initials. Victoria Harrison, her maiden name. The company was registered 6 months after the withdrawals began. She also used cash from these thefts to purchase expensive gifts for Mr. Morrison." "And your husband knew about the affair?" For the first time, Olivia's composure cracked slightly. "Thomas knew about Victoria's extracurricular activities. He chose to ignore them because it suited his purposes. He believed a scandal would help him in divorce proceedings by discrediting me as a mother figure to Emma." Martinez looked up sharply. "Emma?" "My granddaughter. Victoria's daughter from a previous relationship, legally adopted by my son. She's 16 and she's been aware of her mother's affair for months." The detective made a note. In her experience, the children always knew more than the adults realized. "Where is Emma now?" "With my sister-in-law, Margaret. I thought it best to remove her from the situation before it escalated further." "Smart move," Martinez thought. "Mrs. Jackson, I have to ask, why didn't you report the theft when you first discovered it?" Olivia was quiet for a long moment. "I hoped Victoria would stop. I hoped my son would see what was happening and intervene. I hoped," she sighed, "I hoped I wouldn't have to destroy my family to save myself." "But you're willing to do it now?" "Mr. Morrison forced my hand. The blackmail attempt made it clear that simply protecting myself wasn't enough. These people won't stop unless they're stopped." Martinez nodded, recognizing the resolve of someone who'd been pushed too far. "I'll need to speak with each of them individually. Starting with Mr. Morrison." They returned to the living room, where Jimmy had managed to work himself into a state of righteous indignation despite his restraints. "Detective," he began as soon as he saw her, "I want to file a complaint for assault and false imprisonment." "Mr. Morrison," Martinez interrupted, "you're under arrest for attempted extortion. You have the right to remain silent." As she read him his rights, Jimmy's facade finally crumbled completely. "Wait, you don't understand. I was trying to help. They're all criminals. The old lady, the daughter-in-law, all of them. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Martinez continued implacably. When she finished, she turned to Victoria. "Mrs. Hartwell, I need to speak with you privately." Victoria looked to Blackstone, who nodded grimly. In the kitchen, away from the others, Martinez studied the woman who'd been at the center of so much deception. "Mrs. Hartwell, based on the evidence I've seen, I have probable cause to arrest you for theft, fraud, and conspiracy. Before I do that, is there anything you want to tell me?" Victoria's careful composure finally shattered. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," she whispered. "Everything was falling apart. Michael wasn't making enough money. Thomas was talking about changing his will again, and I panicked." "So you started stealing from your husband's accounts?" "It was just small amounts at first. He never noticed. And Jimmy, he said he could help me, that he knew how to handle situations like this." "By blackmailing your family?" Victoria's laugh was bitter. "Jimmy doesn't help anyone but Jimmy. I was just too stupid to see it." Martinez had heard similar stories countless times. Desperation leading to poor choices, which led to worse choices, until the person was trapped in a web of their own making. "Mrs. Hartwell, I'm placing you under arrest for theft and fraud. You have the right to remain silent." By the time Martinez finished processing both arrests, the sun was setting. Michael sat alone in his living room, looking like a man who'd watched his entire world collapse in the span of a few hours. "Mr. Hartwell," Martinez said gently, "I know this is difficult, but I need to ask you some questions." Michael looked up with hollow eyes. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "About the affair, about the money. I should have known, but I didn't want to see it." "The bank accounts she accessed? She had legitimate access? Joint account for household expenses. But the amount she was taking—" He shook his head. "I trusted her. I thought the variations were just normal fluctuations." Martinez studied him carefully. In her experience, there were two types of victims in financial fraud cases: those who were genuinely unaware, and those who chose not to look too closely at convenient windfalls. Michael Hartwell seemed to fall into the first category. "What will happen to Emma?" he asked suddenly. "That's not up to me," Martinez replied honestly, "but she has family who care about her." As if summoned by his concern, the front door opened and Margaret returned with Emma. The teenager took one look at the empty living room and seemed to understand immediately. "They arrested her," Emma said. "It wasn't a question." "Both of them," Martinez confirmed. "Your mother and Mr. Morrison." Emma nodded slowly, then walked over to Michael and sat beside him on the couch. For a moment, they looked like what they were: two people trying to figure out how to rebuild their lives from the wreckage of someone else's choices. "Detective," Olivia said quietly, "what happens now?" Martinez looked around the room, at the evidence of wealth that had masked so much dysfunction, at the family trying to figure out how to move forward, at the woman who'd spent 3 years preparing for this day. "Now we let the legal system work," she said. "There'll be trials, plea negotiations, sentencing. It's going to be a long process." "And Emma?" Martinez looked at the teenager, who was listening with the careful attention of someone whose future hung in the balance. "That'll be up to family court. But given the circumstances, I'd say she has some good options." As Martinez prepared to leave, she pulled Olivia aside. "Mrs. Jackson, I have to say, I've seen a lot of domestic cases, but I've never seen anyone as prepared as you were today." Olivia's smile was sad but determined. "I learned the hard way that hoping for the best isn't the same as preparing for the worst. Any advice for someone in a similar situation?" "Document everything," Olivia said simply. "Trust your instincts, and never let anyone convince you that you're too old, too weak, or too confused to fight for what's right." As the detective drove away, she reflected on the case that had started as a simple blackmail complaint and revealed a family's worth of secrets. In her report, she would note that sometimes the most dangerous criminals were the ones who hid behind charm and family connections. But she would also note that sometimes the most effective investigators were the victims who refused to stay victims. Olivia Jackson had spent 3 years building a case that would have impressed a professional detective. It was a reminder that underestimating people, especially those who appeared vulnerable, could be a costly mistake. The legal machinery was in motion now. Justice, Martinez knew, was rarely swift, but in this case, it seemed it would be thorough. 3 days after the arrests, Olivia stood in Thomas's study, watching Sarah Chen methodically sort through boxes of financial documents that Detective Martinez had cleared for examination. The police investigation had opened doors that had been sealed for decades, and what they were finding painted a picture of Thomas Hartwell that even Olivia hadn't fully grasped. "This is extraordinary," Sarah murmured, holding up a bank statement from an account Olivia had never known existed. "Your husband was far more financially sophisticated than anyone realized." The study felt different now, less like Thomas's sanctuary and more like a crime scene being dismantled piece by piece. Olivia had spent 40 years forbidden from touching anything in this room. Now she was discovering that the man she'd lived with had been a stranger. "How much?" Olivia asked quietly, though part of her wasn't sure she wanted to know. Sarah consulted her notes. "Conservatively?" "Including the offshore accounts, the hidden real estate investments, and what appears to be a substantial cryptocurrency portfolio. We're looking at approximately $2.7 million. The number hung in the air like a physical presence. Olivia sank into the chair that had once been Thomas's throne, feeling the weight of decades of lies pressing down on her. "He told me we couldn't afford to renovate the kitchen," she said with bitter irony. "Said we needed to be careful with money for our retirement." Sarah's expression softened with professional sympathy. "Olivia, this level of financial hiding suggests systematic deception. He wasn't just unfaithful. He was actively stealing from your marriage." Among the papers scattered across the desk, one document caught Olivia's attention. It was handwritten in Thomas's familiar scrawl, dated just 6 months before his death. As she read it, her blood went cold. "Sarah, look at this." The note was short but devastating. "Meeting with Brennan tomorrow about O's situation. Need to ensure she can't contest anything if I die before divorce finalized. Brennan says mental incompetency angle could work. Witnesses to her. Confusion about finances. V willing to testify if needed." "He was planning to have me declared mentally incompetent," Olivia whispered. "With Victoria's help." Sarah's jaw tightened as she read over Olivia's shoulder. "This is evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud on a massive scale. They weren't just planning to divorce you. They were planning to steal your share of assets you'd legally accumulated over 40 years of marriage." The study door opened, and Michael entered, looking haggard. The past few days had aged him years. "Mom?" "The police said I could help with the document review." Olivia handed him the note without comment. She watched his face cycle through confusion, understanding, and finally, fury. "Dad was going to destroy you," he said quietly. "Completely destroy you." "Yes," Olivia replied simply, "but he underestimated me. Just like Victoria did. Just like Jimmy did." Michael looked around the study with new eyes, seeing not his father's impressive domain but the headquarters of a decades-long deception. "What else don't I know?" Sarah pulled out another folder. "Your father's business partner, Frank Brennan, has been calling my office. He wants to meet. Says he has information about your father's irregular business practices." Olivia felt a familiar chill. Thomas had always been secretive about his construction business, claiming it was too complicated for her to understand. Now she was beginning to suspect there had been other reasons for his secrecy. "Schedule the meeting," she said firmly. "It's time I learned exactly who I was married to." Outside the study windows, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the garden Olivia had tended for decades. Soon she would know the full scope of Thomas's betrayals, but for the first time in years, she felt ready for whatever truth was waiting to be uncovered. The man she'd buried wasn't the man she'd thought she'd married. And that revelation, painful as it was also strangely liberating. Frank Brennan looked nothing like the successful construction contractor Olivia had expected. Thin and nervous, with the pallor of someone who'd been carrying heavy secrets for too long, he sat across from her in the conference room of Sarah Chen's law office, his hands trembling slightly as he arranged a stack of documents on the polished table. "Mrs. Jackson," he began, his voice hoarse, "I want you to know I've been waiting for Thomas to die for 3 years." The blunt statement hung in the air between them. Sarah raised an eyebrow while Olivia studied the man who'd been her husband's business partner for over a decade. "That's quite an admission, Mr. Brennan," Sarah said carefully. "It's the truth." Brennan's laugh was bitter. "Thomas Hartwell was a cancer on everything he touched. I should have exposed him years ago, but he had too much dirt on me. Now that he's gone." He pushed the first document toward Olivia. "This is what your husband really was, Mrs. Jackson. A thief, a fraud, and a man who destroyed anyone who got in his way." Olivia looked down at what appeared to be a construction contract, but the numbers didn't make sense. Materials costs were inflated by hundreds of thousands of dollars, labor charges were doubled, and there were line items for work that was never performed. "Insurance fraud," quote, Brennan explained, seeing her confusion. "Thomas perfected the art of billing for work that was never done. Hurricane damage, fire restoration, flood cleanup. He'd get the insurance money, do half the work with substandard materials, and pocket the difference." "How much?" Sarah asked, her legal mind immediately calculating potential liability. "Over the past 5 years? Approximately $4 million. Brennan's voice was flat, emotionless. "Thomas called it creative accounting. I called it stealing. Olivia felt sick. And you participated?" "At first I didn't know. Thomas handled all the billing, the client relationships. By the time I figured it out, he had evidence that I'd signed off on fraudulent invoices. He owned me." Brennan pulled out another folder, this one thick with photographs. "But Thomas got greedy, started targeting individual homeowners, not just insurance companies. Elderly people, mostly. He'd show up after storms, offer to fix their roofs, take payment up front, then disappear." The photographs showed damaged homes, elderly faces filled with confusion and anger, and official documents that made Olivia's stomach churn. These weren't just financial crimes. They were crimes against vulnerable people, exactly the kind of victims Thomas had planned to make her. "Mrs. Patterson next door," Olivia said suddenly, remembering the elderly woman's words at the funeral. "She mentioned Thomas helped her with storm damage last year." Brennan nodded grimly. "Charged her $18,000 for a roof repair that cost maybe $3,000 in materials. She paid him cash up front. The roof started leaking again within 6 months, but Thomas claimed the work was guaranteed, as is." Sarah was taking rapid notes, her expression growing darker with each revelation. "Mr. Brennan, why are you telling us this now? You could be prosecuted as an accessory." "Because I'm dying," Brennan said simply. "Lung cancer. 6 months, maybe less. And because Thomas isn't finished destroying lives even from the grave." He leaned forward, his eyes fixed on Olivia with desperate intensity. "The divorce plan, the scheme to have you declared incompetent, that wasn't just about the money he could see. Thomas was planning to use your confusion to transfer ownership of the business to Michael, then manipulate your son into continuing the fraud operation." "Michael would never," Olivia started. "Michael wouldn't know," Brennan interrupted, "just like I didn't know, at first. Thomas was brilliant at compartmentalizing information, at making people complicit without their knowledge. Your son would have signed papers thinking he was helping the business, and gradually he'd have been drawn deeper into the criminal enterprise." The room fell silent except for the soft sound of Sarah's pen on legal paper. Olivia stared at the photographs of Thomas's victims, elderly faces that could have been her own if his plan had succeeded. "There's more," Brennan said quietly. "The offshore accounts you found? They're not just hidden assets. They're where Thomas laundered money from drug dealers, bookmakers, anyone who needed clean cash and was willing to pay a premium for it." "Money laundering?" Sarah breathed. "Jesus, Olivia, your husband wasn't just a white-collar criminal. He was connected to organized crime." Brennan nodded. "Thomas liked to think he was untouchable because he had dirt on everyone. Politicians, judges, police officers. He had a network of people he'd helped hide money or cover up scandals. But that network is falling apart now that he's gone." "What do you mean?" Olivia asked. I mean, Detective Martinez isn't the only law enforcement officer interested in Thomas's activities. The FBI has been building a case against his money laundering operation for 2 years. They were waiting for the right moment to move. Brennan's smile was grim. Your husband's death and the family drama that followed? It's given them the perfect opportunity to flip his associates and unravel the entire operation. Sarah set down her pen and looked at Olivia with something approaching awe. Do you understand what this means? Your decision to fight back, to document everything, to call the police on Victoria and Jimmy? You've handed federal investigators the key to dismantling a criminal enterprise that's been operating for years. Olivia sat back in her chair, overwhelmed by the scope of Thomas's criminality. She'd thought she was fighting for her own survival and dignity. She hadn't realized she was helping to bring down a network of corruption that had hurt countless innocent people. There's one more thing, Brennan said, reaching for his final folder. The will that left everything to Michael? Thomas never planned for your son to actually inherit anything. He had papers prepared that would have transferred all assets to an offshore trust controlled by him. Michael would have been a figurehead owner of a business designed to destroy him. The viciousness of it took Olivia's breath away. Thomas hadn't just planned to rob her. He'd planned to corrupt and ultimately destroy their son as well. Mr. Brennan, she said finally, what do you need from me? Help me make this right, he said simply. Help me give the FBI everything they need to prosecute everyone involved in this. Help me make sure Thomas's victims get some kind of justice before I die. Olivia looked around the conference room, at the evidence of her husband's crime spread across the table, at the man who was risking his final months to expose the truth. Yes, she said firmly. Let's bring them all down. Victoria Hartwell sat in the county jail's visiting room, her designer clothes replaced by an orange jumpsuit that clashed violently with her platinum hair. 3 days in custody had stripped away the last vestiges of her carefully maintained facade, revealing the desperate woman beneath. When Michael entered the visiting room, she straightened with visible effort, summoning what remained of her manipulative arsenal. Michael, she breathed, reaching across the table as far as the restraints would allow. Thank God you came. I was beginning to think I came because Emma asked me to. Michael interrupted, his voice flat. She wanted to know if you were okay. Victoria's eyes flickered with calculation. Emma, her daughter, could still be the key to salvaging this disaster. How is she? Is she staying with that woman? That woman is my mother, Michael said sharply. And yes, Emma is with her, where she's safe. Safe? Victoria's voice rose, drawing a warning look from the guard. She lowered it to an urgent whisper. Michael, you can't trust her. Your mother has been manipulating all of us for years. Everything that's happened, the arrests, the investigations, it's all part of her plan to destroy our family. Michael studied his wife's face, seeing clearly for perhaps the first time the calculating desperation that had always lurked beneath her beauty. Our family was already destroyed, Victoria. You destroyed it when you decided to steal from me and sleep with Jimmy Morrison. That's not. Victoria started, then stopped, recognizing that denial would get her nowhere. Yes, I made mistakes, terrible mistakes. But I did it for us, for our future. Your mother has money, Michael, real money. Millions that she's been hiding while we struggled. We weren't struggling, Michael said quietly. You were greedy. Victoria leaned forward desperately. Listen to me. Your father's business partner came forward, didn't he? Started talking about irregularities, criminal activity. Michael, your mother orchestrated all of this. She's been working with that man for months, maybe years, feeding him information to destroy your father's memory and steal everything. The lie came so smoothly, with such practiced conviction, that for a moment Michael felt the old familiar doubt creep in. Victoria had always been skilled at making her version of events sound reasonable, at casting herself as the victim of circumstances beyond her control. Frank Brennan has cancer, Michael said slowly. He's dying. Why would he risk prosecution to help my mother with some elaborate scheme? Because she's paying him. Victoria's voice cracked with manufactured desperation. Think about it. She suddenly has all these properties, this business empire we knew nothing about. Where did that money really come from? What if she's been embezzling from your father's company for years? Michael felt a cold anger building in his chest. Even now, even facing criminal charges and the collapse of everything she'd built, Victoria was trying to manipulate him. Trying to turn him against the one person who'd never lied to him. "Stop," he said quietly. "Michael, please, stop." His voice carried an authority that made Victoria fall silent. "I've heard enough lies." Victoria's mask slipped entirely, revealing the panic beneath. "You don't understand what she's capable of. Your mother isn't the sweet, passive woman you think she is. She's ruthless, Michael. She destroyed our marriage. She's destroying your father's legacy, and she's going to destroy you too if you don't." The visiting room door opened, and Emma walked in with a confidence that made Victoria's heart sink. At 16, her daughter moved with a new maturity, as if the events of the past week had forced her to grow up all at once. "Hello, Mom," Emma said, taking the chair beside Michael. Her voice was calm, but there were shadows under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and difficult decisions. "Emma, sweetheart." Victoria's voice took on the coaxing tone she'd perfected over the years. "I've been so worried about you. Are you okay? Is that woman treating you well?" "Grandma Olivia is treating me like family," Emma replied evenly, "like she always has. Honey, you have to understand. She's not really your grandmother. We're not really related. Michael adopted you, yes, but that doesn't make her your blood. Blood doesn't make family," Emma interrupted, her young voice carrying surprising steel. "Love does. Honesty does. Being there when someone needs you does. And you haven't done any of those things for me in a very long time." Victoria felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. "Emma, you don't understand the situation. These adults have been lying to you, keeping things from you. Like you kept Jimmy Morrison from me?" Emma asked quietly. "Like you kept the fact that you were stealing from Michael from me? Like you kept your plan to have Grandma Olivia declared mentally incompetent from me?" The blood drained from Victoria's face. "How did you—" "I read the note," Emma said simply. "The one in Grandpa Thomas's handwriting. The one where he talked about using me as a witness to Grandma Olivia's confusion, if he needed to." Victoria's world tilted dangerously. "Emma, that's not what it meant. You misunderstood." "Did I?" Emma pulled out her phone and placed it on the table. "Because I also found this in your jewelry box last week." She played a voice recording. Victoria's own voice filled the small visiting room. "Emma's been asking too many questions about why I'm always on my phone. We need to be more careful. If she figures out about us, it could complicate things with the inheritance." The recording continued, detailing Victoria's plans to use Emma's testimony about Olivia's supposed confusion, her schemes to manipulate Michael, even her backup plan to claim emotional distress if everything fell apart. "You recorded me," Victoria whispered, staring at her daughter with horror. "I recorded you planning to use me as a weapon against someone I love," Emma corrected. "I recorded you treating me like a tool instead of your daughter." Michael sat in stunned silence, watching his 16-year-old stepdaughter display more strength and wisdom than most adults he knew. "Emma, why didn't you tell me about this?" "Because I hoped I was wrong," Emma said simply. "I hoped Mom would change her mind, would remember that families are supposed to protect each other, not use each other." Victoria looked between her daughter and her husband, seeing her last chance slipping away. "Emma, please, I'm your mother. Whatever I did it because I love you, because I wanted to give you a better life." "No," Emma said firmly. "You did it because you wanted a better life for yourself. There's a difference." She stood up, her decision clearly made. "I'm going to live with Grandma Olivia. Michael is filing for divorce and for full custody of me. And I'm going to testify at your trial about what I heard and saw." Victoria lunged forward against her restraints. "You can't! Emma, I'm your mother." "Yes, you are," Emma said sadly. "And that's the most disappointing thing of all." She turned to Michael. "Are you ready to go? Grandma Olivia is making dinner, and she said you're welcome to join us." Michael stood slowly, his eyes never leaving Victoria's face. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I'm sorry I didn't see what you were becoming. I'm sorry I let you hurt the people I should have been protecting. Michael, please. Victoria's voice broke completely. Don't leave me like this. Don't let her turn you against me. Think about our marriage, our future. Our marriage ended the day you decided my family was an obstacle to overcome instead of people to love, Michael replied. Our future ended when you chose money over Emma's happiness. As they reached the door, Victoria played her final card. Emma, think about what you're doing. She's an old woman. She could die any day, and then where will you be? I'm young. I'm your mother. I can give you decades of love and support. Emma turned back one last time, her young face serene despite the tears. Mom, I'd rather have 1 year of real love than decades of manipulation disguised as affection. The door closed behind them with a finality that echoed through the visiting room. Victoria sat alone, staring at the empty chairs where her family had been, finally understanding that she'd gambled everything and lost. Outside in the parking lot, Michael put his arm around Emma's shoulders as they walked toward his car. Are you okay? I will be, Emma said quietly. Grandma Olivia says healing takes time, but it does happen if you let it. Michael nodded, thinking about the woman who'd raised him, who'd spent 3 years preparing for this moment not out of vengeance but out of love. Love for him, love for Emma, love for the family that Victoria had tried to destroy. It was time to go home and begin rebuilding what could be saved. 6 months had passed since that terrible day in the living room when Victoria's world had finally collapsed around her like a house of cards in a hurricane. Olivia stood at her kitchen window, watching Emma arrange pink roses in a crystal vase. The same vase that had held funeral lilies what felt like a lifetime ago. The September morning light streamed through those same bay windows Thomas had once complained about, but now Olivia kept them uncovered, letting the brightness fill every corner of the house. The transformation had been gradual but profound. The heavy damask curtains Thomas had insisted upon were gone, replaced by airy white linen that danced in the breeze. The dark mahogany furniture that had dominated the living room had been moved to storage, replaced by pieces that invited conversation rather than demanded reverence. The house breathed differently now, as if it too had been released from some long-held constraint. Grandma Olivia, do you think 17 roses is too many? Emma called from the dining room, her voice carrying the particular anxiety of someone planning their first real birthday celebration in years. Sweetheart, there's no such thing as too many roses on your birthday, Olivia replied, carrying a tray of fresh-baked scones to the counter. The kitchen smelled of vanilla and lemon, warm and welcoming in a way it hadn't been during Thomas's lifetime. He'd preferred everything to smell like the industrial-strength cleaners the housekeeper used, sterile and impersonal. Emma appeared in the doorway, and Olivia marveled once again at how much the girl had changed. The hollow-cheeked, anxious teenager who'd watched her family implode had grown into a young woman with clear eyes and steady shoulders. Living away from Victoria's toxic influence had allowed Emma's natural warmth to flourish, and the past months of stability had added healthy color to her cheeks and confidence to her bearing. Sarah's bringing her famous chocolate cake, Emma said, consulting the list they'd made together the night before. Margaret's handling the sandwiches, and Detective Martinez said she'd bring her mother's famous empanadas. It still surprised Olivia sometimes how their little circle had formed. Sarah Chen had transitioned from lawyer to friend, with remarkable ease, her dry wit and fierce loyalty making her indispensable during the darkest moments of the legal proceedings. Detective Rosa Martinez had proven to be not just thorough in her investigation, but genuinely caring about the human cost of family betrayal. And Margaret, dear Margaret, had been Olivia's rock throughout everything, never once saying, "I told you so," despite having warned about Victoria from the beginning. The doorbell chimed, and Emma practically bounced toward the front hall. "That's probably Dad." Olivia felt the familiar flutter of mixed emotions that accompanied Michael's visits. Her son had been through his own transformation over the past 6 months, one that had been painful but necessary. The divorce proceedings had been swift once Victoria's criminal charges became public knowledge. The revelation of her affair, combined with the evidence of financial fraud, had made Michael's decision inevitable, though no less heartbreaking for its necessity. "Mom!" Michael's voice carried from the entryway, accompanied by Emma's delighted squeal. Happy birthday, kiddo. When they entered the kitchen, Olivia was struck once again by how different Michael looked. The permanent tension that had carved lines around his eyes during his marriage to Victoria was gone, replaced by something that resembled peace. He'd lost weight, stress and the discipline of living alone had trimmed away the soft edges that comfortable married life had provided, and there was a steadiness to his movements that spoke of a man who'd finally learned to trust his own judgment. "You look wonderful, sweetheart," Olivia said, accepting his kiss on her cheek. "How's the new apartment working out?" "It's good. Quiet." He smiled, and for the first time in years it reached his eyes. "I'm actually enjoying the solitude. Gives me time to think without someone telling me what I should be thinking." Emma wrapped her arms around his waist, and Olivia watched her son's face soften with genuine paternal affection. Whatever else Victoria had stolen from their family, she hadn't managed to destroy the bond between Michael and Emma. If anything, the crisis had strengthened it, giving Michael the motivation he'd needed to finally stand up for what mattered. "How's the job search going?" Olivia asked, though she already knew from their weekly phone calls. Michael had left the accounting firm where Thomas had secured him a position years ago, determined to build something on his own merits rather than riding on family connections. "Actually, I have news about that." Michael's smile widened, and Emma clapped her hands together expectantly. "I got the position with the nonprofit downtown, the one that helps small businesses get started." "Michael, that's wonderful." Olivia felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with salary or prestige, and everything to do with seeing her son choose work that aligned with his values rather than his father's expectations. "When do you start?" "Next Monday. And the timing's perfect because—" He paused, suddenly looking nervous. "Well, there's something else I wanted to tell you both." Emma's eyes lit up with curiosity, and Olivia felt a flutter of maternal intuition. There was something different about Michael today, a lightness she hadn't seen in years. "I've been seeing someone," he continued, his cheeks actually coloring slightly. "Her name is Jennifer, and she works at the literacy center where I've been volunteering. We've been taking things very slowly. I wanted to make sure I was in a good place before getting involved with anyone again." "Dad!" Emma practically shrieked with delight. "That's amazing! When do we get to meet her?" "Soon," Michael promised. "She's actually the one who encouraged me to apply for the nonprofit job. She said life's too short to spend it doing work that doesn't matter to you." Olivia felt tears prick at her eyes. Her son was learning to value wisdom that came from love rather than manipulation, guidance rather than control. "She sounds like a wise woman." "She is." Michael's expression grew serious. "Mom, I need to say something and I should have said it months ago." He took a deep breath. "I'm sorry. For all of it. For believing Victoria when she tried to turn me against you. For not seeing what was happening right in front of me. For being weak when you needed me to be strong." The kitchen fell silent except for the gentle ticking of the antique clock on the mantel. Emma moved closer to her father, her young face reflecting the gravity of the moment. "Michael," Olivia said gently, "you were manipulated by an expert. Victoria had years to perfect her techniques, and she used your love for Emma and your desire to keep the peace against you. That doesn't make you weak, it makes you human." "But I should have seen it," he insisted. "The signs were all there. The way she talked about you, the things she said about Dad's will, the constant pressure to choose sides. A stronger man would have—" "A stronger man?" Olivia interrupted, her voice carrying an edge of steel. "Michael James Hartwell, you listened to me. You stood up to your wife when it mattered most. You chose truth over comfort. You protected Emma when she needed protection. That's not weakness. That's courage." Michael's eyes filled with tears he'd been holding back for months. "I just wish I'd done it sooner." "We all have things we wish we'd done sooner," Olivia replied, thinking of her own 3 years of secret preparation, the evidence she'd gathered while playing the role of dutiful wife. "But regret is a luxury we can't afford. We move forward with the wisdom we've gained." The doorbell chimed again, breaking the emotional tension. Emma jumped up, wiping at her own eyes. That'll be Margaret with the sandwiches. As Emma ran to answer the door, Michael helped Olivia arrange the birthday decorations they'd put up the night before. Pink and gold streamers hung from the chandelier, and balloons bobbed gently in the corner. It was the first birthday party the house had seen in years. Thomas had considered them frivolous expenses, and Olivia felt a deep satisfaction in filling her home with celebration rather than somber propriety. Margaret bustled in carrying platters wrapped in checkered tea towels, her practical nurse's demeanor softened by obvious affection for the birthday girl. Behind her came Sarah Chen, elegant as always, balancing a spectacular chocolate cake decorated with fresh strawberries. "Rosa's running a few minutes late," Sarah announced, setting the cake carefully on the counter. "She got called in to testify in another case this morning, but she should be here soon." "What kind of case?" Emma asked with the morbid curiosity of a 17-year-old. "The boring kind," Sarah replied diplomatically. "Financial fraud. Nothing as dramatic as your family's soap opera." "Speaking of which," Margaret said, unwrapping a platter of elegant finger sandwiches, "has anyone heard how Victoria's adjusting to her new accommodations?" Olivia felt Michael tense beside her. Victoria's sentencing 3 months ago had been swift and decisive. The judge, unimpressed by her attempts to play the victim, had handed down 18 months for fraud, conspiracy, and attempted extortion. Jimmy Morrison had received 2 years for blackmail and was serving his time in a different facility. The restraining order prevented Victoria from contacting Emma directly, though she'd tried to circumvent it several times through third parties. "Emma gets letters," Michael said quietly. "We've been reading them together to decide if they're appropriate." "Most of them aren't," Emma added with surprising matter-of-factness. "She keeps trying to convince me that everyone conspired against her, and that she's the real victim in all this. She doesn't understand that I saw what she did, heard what she said. She can't gaslight me anymore." The simple clarity of Emma's statement hit Olivia like a physical blow. This child had been forced to grow up too fast, to see through adult lies and manipulation that would challenge someone twice her age. Yet instead of becoming bitter or cynical, Emma had chosen to embrace truth and healing. She was stronger than any of them had imagined. "You know," Sarah said, pulling out her phone to check the time, "I have some news about that situation." All eyes turned to her expectantly. Sarah's expression was carefully neutral, but Olivia caught the hint of satisfaction in her eyes. "Victoria's lawyer contacted me yesterday. She's apparently had a change of heart about her appeals and wants to discuss a plea arrangement for early release." "What kind of plea arrangement?" Michael asked suspiciously. "Full restitution of all funds she stole from your accounts, a formal apology to both you and Emma, and agreement to maintain no contact with the family for 5 years beyond her sentence. In exchange, we'd support her request for early release based on good behavior." Michael and Emma exchanged glances. Olivia watched the silent communication between father and daughter, struck by how much their relationship had deepened through crisis. "What do you think, Em?" Michael asked quietly. "It's your decision as much as anyone's." Emma was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the garden where Olivia had planted new flowers, bright yellow daisies and purple asters that bloomed long into the fall. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a wisdom that seemed far older than her 17 years. "I think," she said slowly, "that I want her to get better. Not because I miss her, not the way she was, but because everyone deserves a chance to change if they really want to. But I also don't want to be her reason or her audience for that change. If she gets better, it has to be for herself." The room was silent as everyone absorbed the profound maturity of Emma's response. Olivia felt a surge of protective pride for this remarkable young woman who'd chosen grace without sacrificing her own boundaries. "So yes to the early release," Emma continued, "but yes to the no-contact agreement too. Maybe someday, when I'm older and she's had time to really change, we can try to have some kind of relationship. But not now. Not while I'm still figuring out who I am without all her chaos." Michael squeezed his daughter's hand, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "I'm so proud of you," he whispered. The doorbell chimed once more, and this time, Rosa Martinez appeared in the doorway. still in her detective's blazer but carrying a covered dish that smelled like heaven. "Sorry I'm late," she called. Judge couldn't decide if he wanted to lecture the defendant or his lawyer more. "Perfect timing," Olivia replied, surveying the assembled group with deep satisfaction. "I think we're ready to celebrate." As they gathered around the dining room table, the same table where Victoria had made her vicious announcement 6 months ago, Olivia marveled at how completely the energy of the house had changed. Instead of tension and hidden resentments, the air hummed with genuine affection and hard-won wisdom. Instead of performance and pretense, there was authentic connection and hope for the future. Emma sat at the head of the table, surrounded by people who loved her, not for what she could provide them, but for who she was becoming. The late afternoon sunlight streamed through those uncovered windows, illuminating faces marked by struggle but brightened by resilience. "Before we eat," Emma announced suddenly, "I want to say something." The table fell quiet, all attention focused on the birthday girl. "6 months ago, I thought my family was falling apart," Emma began, her voice steady despite the emotion underlying her words. "And in some ways, it was. But I've learned that sometimes things have to break completely before they can be rebuilt properly. I've learned that loving someone doesn't mean accepting their bad behavior, and that setting boundaries isn't the same as giving up on people." She looked around the table, her gaze touching each face with obvious affection. "Most importantly, I've learned that family isn't just about blood. It's about people who show up when you need them, who tell you the truth even when it's hard to hear, and who love you enough to help you become the best version of yourself." Her smile grew radiant. "So thank you, all of you, for showing me what real family looks like." As they raised their glasses in toast to Emma's wisdom and bright future, Olivia felt something shift in her chest, the final release of a burden she'd carried for decades. The scared young woman who'd married Thomas at 22, who'd spent 40 years dimming her own light to accommodate someone else's darkness, was finally, completely gone. In her place sat a woman who'd learned that survival wasn't about endurance. It was about transformation. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you could do was refuse to be anyone's victim, even your own. The birthday celebration continued late into the evening, filled with laughter and stories, and the kind of easy conversation that comes when people have nothing to hide from each other. As the last guests prepared to leave, Emma hugged Olivia tightly. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything, for fighting for us, for showing me what strength really looks like." Olivia held her granddaughter, no, her daughter of the heart, and smiled. "Thank you for giving me something worth fighting for." Outside, the September night was crisp with the promise of autumn, and somewhere in the distance, church bells chimed the hour. But inside the house on Millbrook Lane, 3 generations had found their way back to each other, and the future stretched ahead like an open road, bright with possibility. 1 year had passed since Thomas's death, and Olivia Jackson stood in what had once been his study, watching the morning sun illuminate the space she'd transformed into something entirely new. Where once heavy leather furniture and dark wood paneling had created an atmosphere of masculine authority, natural light now poured through enlarged windows onto warm cream walls, lined with photographs of successful women entrepreneurs. The room hummed with quiet activity as 3 women worked at sleek modern desks, their conversations focused on business plans and legal strategies, rather than the complaints and criticisms that had once echoed here. "Mrs. Jackson, the website designer, is here for the consultation," announced Patricia Walsh, the foundation's program coordinator, poking her head through the doorway. At 52, Patricia had been one of their earliest success stories, a woman who'd escaped an abusive marriage with nothing but determination and had built a thriving catering business with the foundation's help. "Perfect timing," Olivia replied, smoothing her navy blazer. The Jackson Foundation for Women's Financial Independence had grown far beyond what she'd originally envisioned. What had started as a simple desire to help women in situations similar to her own had evolved into a comprehensive program offering legal aid, business mentorship, and emergency financial assistance to women breaking free from controlling relationships. The foundation occupied the entire first floor of what had once been Thomas's domain. His former study served as the main office, while the adjacent sitting room had been converted into a resource center filled with computers and business reference materials. The formal dining room now hosted weekly support group meetings and business planning workshops. Even the foyer displayed a large banner reading "Your future starts here," alongside testimonials from women who'd rebuilt their lives with the foundation's help. Olivia made her way to the front parlor, where Emma sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by college brochures and acceptance letters. At 18 now, she'd grown into a confident young woman whose wisdom and compassion had been forged in the fires of family crisis. Her dark hair fell in waves around her shoulders, and her eyes held the particular brightness of someone who'd found her purpose early in life. "Any decisions yet?" Olivia asked, settling into the comfortable armchair they'd chosen together, a far cry from the stiff, formal furniture that had once dominated the space. Emma looked up with a grin that reminded Olivia powerfully of herself at that age. "I keep coming back to Northwestern's social work program. The focus on family systems and trauma recovery feels right, you know?" "It feels like where you're meant to be," Olivia agreed. She'd watched Emma gravitate toward helping others throughout the past year, volunteering at the Foundation's workshops, and showing an intuitive understanding of the complex dynamics that kept women trapped in harmful situations. "Your father will be proud." "Speaking of Dad," Emma said, her smile widening, "he and Jennifer are coming to the garden party today. I think he's finally ready to introduce her to everyone officially." The garden party. Olivia felt a flutter of nervous excitement as she thought about the afternoon ahead. They were celebrating the Foundation's first anniversary with an outdoor event showcasing the businesses started by their program participants. Local media would be there, along with potential donors and community leaders. It represented everything she'd worked toward, not just financial independence for herself, but the creation of something lasting that would help other women long after she was gone. The doorbell chimed, and Patricia's voice called from the office. "Mrs. Jackson, Detective Martinez is here." Rosa Martinez appeared in the parlor doorway, no longer wearing her detective's badge but carrying herself with the same confident bearing. She'd retired from the police force 6 months earlier and now worked as the Foundation's security consultant, helping women navigate restraining orders and safety planning when leaving dangerous relationships. "The security team is all set for this afternoon," Rosa reported, settling into the chair opposite Olivia. "We've got discreet coverage around the perimeter, and I've briefed the catering staff on our safety protocols." It was a precaution that had become necessary after Victoria's release from prison 2 months earlier. Though the restraining order remained in effect, there had been incidents. Flowers left on Emma's car at school, phone calls to Michael's workplace, letters sent to the Foundation's office address. Victoria seemed unable to accept that her actions had consequences, that the family she'd tried to destroy had not only survived but thrived without her. "Any word from Sarah about the harassment injunction?" Olivia asked. "She's confident the judge will grant it," Rosa replied. "The documented pattern of contact violations makes it pretty cut and dried. Victoria will have to choose between respecting boundaries or going back to prison." Emma looked up from her college materials with concern. "Do you really think she'd try something today? With all the people around?" "I think," Rosa said carefully, "that your mother has spent the past year in therapy being told she's the victim in this situation. Some people find it easier to believe that than to accept responsibility for their choices. But that's why we have protocols, so you can focus on celebrating instead of worrying." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Margaret, bustling through the front door with her arms full of flowers from her own garden. She'd become the Foundation's volunteer coordinator, bringing the same no-nonsense efficiency she'd used as a nurse to organizing their community outreach programs. "The caterers are setting up in the back garden," she announced, "and it looks absolutely gorgeous. You've outdone yourself with the planning, Olivia." Through the bay windows, Olivia could see the transformation that had taken place in what had once been Thomas's precisely manicured showcase garden. The rigid formal plantings had been replaced with wildflower meadows and meandering paths that invited exploration rather than demanding admiration. A small gazebo provided shade for elderly visitors, while picnic tables scattered throughout the space encouraged mingling and conversation. "The press should start arriving around noon," Patricia called from the office. Channel 7 wants to interview you about the economic impact study. The study had been Sarah's idea. A comprehensive analysis of how the foundation's work rippled through the local economy. The 37 businesses started by their participants had created over 200 jobs and generated more than $3 million in revenue. The numbers told a story of transformation that went far beyond individual success stories. Emma stood and stretched, gathering her college materials into a neat pile. "I should go get ready," Jennifer texted that she's nervous about meeting everyone. "She shouldn't be," Olivia said warmly. "Anyone who makes your father smile the way she does is already family as far as I'm concerned." As Emma headed upstairs, Olivia found herself reflecting on how naturally the word family had evolved to encompass their chosen community. The boundaries that had once seemed so rigid, blood relatives, legal connections, social expectations, had dissolved to make room for relationships based on genuine affection and mutual support. Sarah Chen arrived as Olivia was reviewing her speech notes, her usual professional composure softened by obvious pride in what they'd built together. She'd become much more than the foundation's legal counsel. She was Olivia's closest friend and most trusted advisor, the sister Olivia had never had. The mayor's office called, Sarah announced, settling at the kitchen island where they'd shared so many cups of coffee and strategic planning sessions. They want to discuss expanding the program county-wide. Apparently, the state has noticed what we're doing here. State-level expansion, Olivia mused, feeling a familiar thrill at the possibility of reaching even more women. "A year ago, I was hiding money from my husband. Now we're talking about changing policy at the state level." "You were never hiding, Olivia," Sarah said gently. "You were preparing, there's a difference." The distinction mattered more than Sarah probably realized. For so many years, Olivia had felt like she was living in shadow, accommodating and adapting and diminishing herself to maintain peace. The woman who'd stood in her living room a year ago, watching Thomas's mourners eat her food while Victoria plotted her downfall, had still been partially hidden, even from herself. "Mrs. Jackson?" Patricia appeared in the kitchen doorway with a tablet in her hands. "The photographer from the Business Journal is here early. She'd like to get some shots of the foundation office before the party starts." As Olivia posed for pictures in the space that had once symbolized everything she'd been excluded from, she felt the profound satisfaction of a circle closing. Thomas's desk, the massive mahogany monument to masculine authority, had been replaced by a collaborative workspace where women helped other women plan their futures. His hunting trophies and business awards had given way to photographs of foundation success stories and children's artwork from the daycare center they'd helped establish. The photographer was particularly interested in the wall where they'd hung framed copies of all the business licenses issued to foundation participants. "It's like a gallery of dreams made real," she observed, snapping shots from various angles. "That was the idea," Olivia replied. "We wanted women to see possibility when they walked in here, not intimidation." Michael arrived as the photographer was finishing, looking more relaxed and confident than Olivia had seen him in years. The man who'd once deferred to his father's judgment and his wife's manipulation had found his own voice in the nonprofit world, discovering a talent for connecting with struggling families that surprised everyone, including himself. "Mom, the back garden looks incredible," he said, kissing her cheek. "Jennifer's parking the car. She brought her famous chocolate chip cookies." "Is she nervous?" Olivia asked, straightening his tie with the automatic gesture of motherhood. "Terrified," Michael admitted with a fond smile. "She keeps saying she doesn't know how to talk to successful businesswomen. I told her she runs a literacy program that's changed hundreds of lives. But you know how people get about meeting their boyfriend's family." The word boyfriend still made Olivia smile. At 40, Michael was discovering what healthy relationships looked like, learning to value partnership over dominance, communication over control. Jennifer Morrison, no relation to the infamous Jimmy, was everything Victoria hadn't been. Genuine, supportive, and completely uninterested in the Hartwell family's money or status. As the morning progressed, the house filled with the controlled chaos of event preparation. Volunteers arranged tables, volunteers tested the sound system, and Patricia managed everything with the efficiency of a military operation. Olivia found herself moving between spaces that had once been rigidly compartmentalized, watching the formal boundaries of her old life dissolve into something organic and alive. The first guests began arriving just after noon, and Olivia positioned herself in the garden to greet them personally. Mayor Stevens came with his wife and a photographer from his office. The bank president arrived with several board members, clearly interested in the foundation's financial success. Local business owners mingled with foundation participants, creating the kind of cross-pollination of ideas and connections that made real change possible. "Olivia," called a familiar voice, and she turned to see Dr. Rachel Martinez, Rosa's daughter, approaching with a woman Olivia didn't recognize. "I'd like you to meet someone special." The woman was perhaps 45, impeccably dressed but with an air of careful control that Olivia recognized immediately. Her smile was practiced, her posture guarded, her eyes constantly scanning for threats or judgment. "This is Catherine Wells," Dr. Martinez continued. "She's been following the foundation's work online and drove down from Albany to learn more about your programs." As Olivia shook Catherine's hand, she felt the slight tremor that spoke of barely controlled anxiety. Here was another woman standing at the crossroads, between staying safe in the familiar prison of a controlling relationship and risking everything for the possibility of freedom. "I've read about everything you've accomplished," Catherine said quietly. "I keep wondering if it's too late for someone like me to start over." The question hit Olivia squarely in the chest. She saw herself a year ago in Catherine's carefully composed desperation, the hope warring with fear in her eyes. "How old are you, Catherine?" Olivia asked gently. 53 next month." "I was 62 when I started my business," Olivia replied. 63 when I left my marriage. There's no expiration date on reinventing yourself." As they talked, Olivia watched Catherine's posture gradually relax. The practiced smile gave way to something more genuine, and the careful control loosened enough to allow real emotion to show through. This was why the foundation mattered. Not just for the business plans and legal aid, but for the moment when a woman realized she wasn't alone, wasn't crazy, wasn't too old or too damaged or too afraid to change her life. Emma appeared at Olivia's elbow with a gentle touch. "Grandma, it's time for your speech." The crowd had grown throughout the afternoon, filling the garden with a mix of foundation supporters, local dignitaries, and women in various stages of their own journeys toward independence. Olivia made her way to the small stage they'd set up near the gazebo, feeling the weight of all the eyes turned toward her. A year ago, she would have been terrified to speak publicly about anything more controversial than a church bake sale. Now, as she looked out over the faces gathered in her garden, women she'd helped, friends she'd chosen, family she'd claimed, she felt only gratitude and determination. "A year ago," she began, her voice carrying clearly across the garden, "I stood in my living room surrounded by people who thought they knew exactly who I was and what I was capable of. I was the grieving widow, the dutiful wife, the woman who needed to be taken care of by others. I was invisible in my own life." The crowd fell silent, drawn by the quiet authority in her voice. What they didn't know, what I had barely begun to understand myself, was that invisibility had been my choice. Not a conscious choice, but a choice nonetheless. For 40 years, I had made myself smaller so that others could feel larger. I had dimmed my own light so that others could shine. She paused, looking out over faces that reflected her own journey in various stages of completion. "The Jackson Foundation exists because I learned something important. There is no age limit on becoming who you are meant to be. There is no point at which it's too late to choose courage over comfort, authenticity over approval, truth over temporary peace." The applause that followed was sustained and heartfelt, but Olivia barely heard it. She was looking at Catherine Wells, who stood with tears streaming down her face, and Emma, who glowed with pride, and Michael, who held Jennifer's hand as if she were his anchor to this new understanding of what love could be. As the afternoon wound down and guests began to drift away, Olivia found herself standing in the spot where Thomas's rose garden had once displayed his need for perfect control. In its place, wildflowers swayed in the breeze, beautiful in their natural disorder, thriving because they were allowed to grow as they were meant to be. Emma appeared beside her, no longer the anxious teenager who'd watched her family implode, but a young woman ready to build something meaningful with her life. So Emma said, linking her arm through Olivia's, Northwestern in the fall, the foundation expanding statewide, and Catherine Wells is moving in next week to start our residential program. Not bad for a year's work. Olivia smiled, thinking of all the women like Catherine who would find their way to this garden, to this house, to this community of people who understood that survival was just the beginning. The real work, the work of becoming, started after you decided you deserved better. Not bad at all, she agreed, watching the sun set over the life they'd built from the ashes of the old one. Not bad at all. In the distance, church bells chimed the evening hour, just as they had on that terrible day when Victoria had announced her intention to claim what wasn't hers. But now the sound carried a different meaning. Not an ending, but a beginning. Not a mourning, but a celebration. The wake was over. The real living had begun. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. Quote,